Celestial basic training for and in preparation for cosmic spiritual warfare. That will be the title of this reflection here, and we're going to be looking at a couple quotes really centering on this idea of an early stages of spiritual work. There seems to be a plethora of sort of angelic and celestial forces that aid one in the process. But then those celestial forces seem to all but abruptly leave one in the midst of their progress. So Origen is going to be, in this quote, talking about how, the assistance from angelic beings, guardian angels, what have you, is for a period of time, all in preparation for ultimately the liberation of angels through man. So this kind of inverse of the idea of angelic support in terms of the liberation of the angels through man, provided that he develops spiritually. So the quote from Origen: "But we must not always rely on the angels to fight for us. They help us only at the beginning, when we ourselves are commencing. With the progress of time, we should arm ourselves for combat. Before we learn to do battle, so that we will consider giving ourselves up to the battles of the Lord, we are succored by the princes, by angels. Initially, we receive the provision of celestial bread. As long as we are children, we are nourished by milk. When we begin to hold to the word of Christ, we live as children under the authority of tutors, procurators. But when we have tasted the sacraments of celestial militia, when we have nourished ourselves on the bread of life, listen how the apostolic trumpet invites us into combat. It is with a loud voice that Paul cried to us, saying, quote, 'Take the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand the wiles of the devil.'" Close quote. He no longer permits us to hide ourselves under the wings of our nurse. He invites us to the fields of battle. "Gird yourself," he says, quote, "with the breastplate of righteousness, and the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, and above all the shield of faith, with which you can quench all the flaming darts of the evil one." Close quote. Moving on to a quote from John of the Cross, reflecting on the presence and absence, the apparent presence and absence of grace in spiritual development. There are times I've reflected on this in another couple videos in my own experience, where this sort of divine inspiration runs dry, and it seems like all of that energy and inspiration is lost, but that's not necessarily the case. And there's also a question of how to discern from whence the inspiration or lack thereof comes from. What is its origin? What qualities of inspiration and its inverse can give one signposts to understand its origins here. So here's the quote from St. John of the Cross. "It is at the time, i.e. beginners, are going about their spiritual exercises with delight and satisfaction, when in their opinion the sun of divine favor is shining most brightly on them, that God darkens all this light and closes the door and spring of the sweet spiritual water they were tasting as often and as long as they desired. For since they were weak and tender, no door was closed to them, as St. John says in the Apocalypse, Revelation 3:8. God now leaves them in such darkness that they do not know which way to turn in their discursive imaginings, that they cannot advance in a step in meditation as they used to, now that the interior sensory faculties are engulfed in this night. He leaves them in such dryness that they not only fail to receive satisfaction and pleasure from their spiritual exercises and works as they formerly did, but also find these exercises distasteful and bitter. As I said, when God sees that they have grown a little, he weans them from the sweet breast so that they might be strengthened, lays aside their swaddling bands and puts them down from his arms, so they may grow accustomed to walking by themselves. was from St. John of the Cross, the Dark Night. Next is from St. Anthony the Great, in this same line of thinking. It is quite possible to tell the difference between the good and the bad when God grants it. A vision of the holy ones is not turbulent. It comes so quietly and gently that instantly joy and gladness and courage arise in the soul. And the thoughts of the soul remain untroubled and unruffled, so that in its own bright transparency, it is able to behold those who appear. Such then is the vision of the holy ones. On the other hand, the attack and appearance of the evil one is full of confusion, accompanied by crashing, roaring, and shouting. It could well be the tumult produced by rude boys and robbers. This at once begets terror in the soul, disturbance and confusion of thought, dejection, hatred of ascetics, indifference, sadness, remembrance of kinsfolk, and fear of death, and then a desire for evil, a disdain for virtue, and a complete subversion of character. When therefore you have a vision or experience some inspiration and are afraid, if then the fear is taken from you immediately, and in its place comes ineffable joy and contentment and courage and recovery of strength and calmness of thought, and the other things I have mentioned, and stout-heartedness too, and love of God, then be of good cheer and pray for your joy and your soul's tranquility, betoken the holiness of him who is present. But when you have certain visions and confusion overtakes you, and there is tumult from without, and earthly apparitions, and threats of death, and all of things I've mentioned, then know that the visit is from the wicked. From St. Teresa of Avila. Locutions inspired that come from the devil not only lead to no good, but leave bad effects behind them. These I have experienced, though only in 2 or 3 occasions, and each time I have had an immediate warning from the Lord that they came from the devil. Not only is the soul left in great dryness, but there is also a certain disquiet, such as I have experienced on many other occasions when the Lord has allowed me to be subjected to great temptations and spiritual trials of various sorts. But although these disquiet torments me very often, as I shall say later, it is not easy to know where it comes from. The soul seems to resist the experience and is upset and afflicted without knowing why, for what is actually said is not evil but good. The pleasures and joys which the devil bestows differ greatly, I believe, from those which come from God, after visions of the kind that come from the devil. The soul is not left in a calm state, but in a kind of bewilderment and most perturbed. When the devil speaks to us, all good things seem to be hidden from the soul and to flee from it. It becomes restless and touchy and suffers nothing but bad effects. It may seem to have good desires, but they are not strong, and the humility that remains behind is false, excitable, and lacking in tranquility. Close quote from the life of St. Teresa of Avila. And finally, from St. John of the Cross again. There is great difference between the visions of God and those of the evil one, for the effect of the latter is not like the former. Those of Satan result in dryness of spirit and a tendency to self-esteem, to accept and make of visions, and to no degree whatever do they produce the gentleness of humility and love of God. Again, the forms of the diabolic visions do not remain impressed on the soul with sweet clearness of the others, neither do they endure, yea, rather are immediately effaced, except when the soul attaches itself to them. In that case, the importance attached to them causes them to be remembered naturally, but with great dryness of spirit, and without the fruit of humility and love, which issue out of the good visions, whenever they recur in the memory. The effects of these latter visions in the soul are quietness, enlightenment, joy, like glory, sweetness, pureness, love, humility, inclination, or elevation of the mind to God, sometimes more of one, sometimes more of the other. Close quote from St. John of the Cross, The Ascent of Mount Carmel. So just wanted to share those few quotes with you guys. Hope everybody's well, and I'll see you guys next time.